This is a Dynamite Network podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Johnny DC.
And I'm his twin brother, Marvelous Joe.
And in our fourth week of Spooktober, we are going to be reviewing the spooky film, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance.
Spooky good, right? Or spooky bad.
Spooky in the kind of way where it's like, oh no, I don't want to watch this. It's because it's kind of spooky and bad.
Yeah, there's things I like about the movie, things I don't. But we are going to be joined in our review by special guest John Starosky from the Mad Trivia podcast. So look forward to that later this episode.
Of course, before that, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, which actually, no, we're not, because there was no comic book movie news from the past week. It's super dead right now in terms of Hollywood coverage.
But we are coming to you with the news of how awesome the podcast Senjoh World is, hosted by executive producer of this show, Zachary Hepburn. We're going to be talking to him later on this episode. As always, we list our segment times in our episode description, so feel free to check out the show notes if you want to skip ahead to a particular topic. As our listeners may know, our duel simulator is so advanced that it's gained sentience and has named itself the artificial life form for running extensive duels, just a rather very intelligent Simulator 9000 or Alfred Jarvis 9000. He has a quick message for our listeners, so listen up.
Why, hello there. Do you love listening and chatting about Marvel and DC? Then become a part of the Dynamic Duel community on Patreon, where you can choose from 3 tiers. The Dynamic 2.0 tier lets you listen to this podcast without ads and gives you access to its Discord chat group, where you can chat with Johnny DC and Marvelous Joe. The Fantastic 4 tier gives you that and more with 2 bonus episodes each month, including bloopers and top 10 shows where Johnny and Joe count down your favorite Marvel and DC subjects. The X-Force tier makes you an executive producer of Dynamic Duel, where every month you help the host choose what to review and who to fight against each other. And finally, the Dynamite Podcast Network tier allows aspiring podcasters to create their own battle-focused show using this Monte Carlo simulator. Johnny and Joe will help you develop your show, provide graphic support and consultation, and get you simulation results to announce on your show. Pitch the twins your show via email at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by reaching out to them on social media. Check it out at patreon.com/dynamicduel. Pip pip cheerio.
Thanks, AJ9K, and thanks to everyone who supports the podcast.
Be sure to tune in to the Max Destruction podcast, part of the Dynamite Podcast Network, this Wednesday, where this month host Ken is going to pit some of the spookiest film characters against each other, including Candyman and Leatherface, and Predator versus the Alien Queen.
Yeah, also tune into Senjoh World this week to find out who'd win in a fight between the anime characters of Muzaka and Alucard.
Visit dynamicpodcasts.com or click on the link in our show notes to listen to all the shows in the Dynamite Podcast Network.
But with that out of the way,
quick to the no prize.
A No Prize is an award Marvel used to give out to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award we post on Instagram and in our email newsletter for the person that we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week.
Last week, we asked, what upcoming television series from Marvel or DC are you most looking forward to, and why?
Yeah, we got a few answers, not very many. Actually, a little bit disappointed in the quality of the answers, because none of them were Marvel. They were all DC. Actually, we did get one Marvel answer, except it was for a non-existent show that's not actually coming out. Someone said that they were excited for Nova to come out, but that's not really a thing. That was just something that someone said one time on the internet. So
wishful thinking, yeah.
Yeah, wishful thinking. But our first honorable mention goes to Miggy Matanguihan, who said,
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Miggy. And the first thought that came to my mind was My Adventures with Superman Season 2. But I think you guys said series and not season, so I'm going to go with the Green Lantern show. That's going to be part of the James Gunn's DC Comics universe. I think it'll just be really fun to see like a buddy cop movie and see like redemption for the Green Lantern franchises in live action.
Yeah, so we've been waiting for a live-action Green Lantern series for what seems like forever. Of course, with James Gunn and Peter Safran taking the helm of DC Studios, the planned HBO Max Green Lantern series has been scrapped, and I guess it's being retooled under the direction of the new heads of the studio. Of course, our first Green Lantern in the universe has already been cast. Nathan Fillion is playing Guy Gardner, but we're not sure if he's going to be a star in the upcoming Green Lanterns television series.
Yeah, Finn Wittrock was attached to the character of Guy Gardner in the previous iteration of this series, but this new show set in the DC universe has been described as being akin to True Detective, which sounds awesome. So yeah, I can see why Miggy's looking forward to it.
Yeah, no words on a release date yet for that show. Great answer, Miggy. Our next honorable mention goes to Andrew Schunk, who said,
Andrew Schunk here. The show I'm looking forward to most is Lanterns. With it being a true detective style, it can bring in so much, and having a group like the Durlans play the main antagonist also then opens up the world of DC and can bring in Brainiac or the Dominators and really makes it an epic show. Plus, interested to see who they're going to cast.
So Andrew also gave the answer of Lanterns, saying that it's really going to open up DC's universe, specifically the cosmic universe, where we get to meet different alien characters. And I think that's a great justification for why the show is going to be awesome, because not many DC movies have taken place in outer space on other planets.
Yeah, Andrew also mentioned that he's excited to see who they're going to cast for the characters of Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. Jonathan, off the top of your head, who you going with?
Oh, shit. Well, Channing Tatum has been rumored for Hal Jordan, and I don't hate that. Like, I would totally accept that.
I kind of hate that. I don't know.
What? Nah, get out of here. And then to pair with Channing Tatum, I'd go with, I don't know, John David Washington.
There you go. That wouldn't be bad. Great answer, Andrew Schunk. Thanks to Nate Mantaneo for taking the time to visit our website and leave an answer. But the winner of this week's No Prize is Christopher Minotti, who said,
Hi guys, Christopher Minotti. I'm really looking forward to the Penguin TV show. I really like Colin Farrell's The Penguin in The Batman, and I really want to see more of that character. I think it would be cool to see more of his empire and see how much control he actually has over Gotham. Plus, this could be a good way to introduce more of Batman's rogues gallery, like Black Mask or even Deadshot.
Absolutely. I cannot wait for this series to come out. Of course, the series is a sequel to the Batman film that came out last year. Colin Farrell totally killed it as the Penguin, totally unrecognizable, did a fantastic job, and I can't wait to see more of that character in his own series where, yeah, you're right, we may be introduced to more of Gotham's criminal underworld with characters like maybe Harvey Dent, Black Mask, maybe even Harley Quinn. That would be cool.
Yeah, those characters would all certainly be interesting, set within the very realistic, grounded world that Matt Reeves set up in the Batman movie. So great answer, Christopher Minotti. You win this week's No Prize. If you, the listener, want a shot at winning your own No Prize, stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. But with that out of the way,
on to the news!
All right, so there's no news this week, but we are going to, in a moment here, get Zachary Hepburn on the line, who is the host of the Senjoh World Anime Action Podcast, which is part of the Dynamite Podcast Network. But leading into the interview, we want to hit you guys with the question of the week.
Which Marvel or DC character do you think would make for the most awesome anime series, and why?
Yeah, since we're going to be talking to Zach about his show, which is about anime, we thought this was an appropriate question. Of course, there already have been some Marvel and DC characters that have had animes, such as, I guess, Superman, with the recent My Adventures with Superman show. Also Wolverine, the X-Men, Blade. So none of those guys that have already had animes. We're talking about like new characters that have not had an anime movie or series yet.
Right. Record your answer at dynamicduel.com by clicking on the red microphone button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which will prompt you to leave us a voicemail. Your message could be up to 30 seconds long, and don't forget to leave your name in case we include you on the podcast. We'll pick our favorite answer and award that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to Instagram and our email newsletter. Be sure to answer before October 28th.
All right, let's get executive producer Zachary Hepburn on the line to talk about his podcast, Senjoh World. Hey, Zach, glad to have you on the show since you were last on for our amazing Spider-Man review.
It's good to be back. I'm excited. It's been a while.
It has been a while. For those who don't know, Zach is an executive producer of Dynamic Duel, and as we launched our Dynamite Podcast Network, Zach came to us right away, pitching a show where he would use the Monte Carlo simulator to see who would win in fights between anime characters. And without hesitating, Jonathan and I were like, absolutely. You know, he has podcasting experience. He's extremely knowledgeable about not just anime, but literally everything pop culture, really. I think out of anyone, Zach, you probably could have created a show about anything, like, because you game more than anybody I know. Like, you know everything about video games. You have an insane movie collection. You know everything about movies. You read tons of comics. You know, you're a big fan of superheroes. And of course, you watch a lot of shows, both animated and live action. So I guess starting off, out of everything you could have made a show about, what made you decide on anime?
To be honest, it was one of those phases I was going through. I kind of go through phases of what I really get into. And at that point, it was anime. But at the same time, I was like, anime would be perfect for this, right? And I was actually talking with one of my guests, and he also listens to Dynamic Duel. And when he first heard you guys talk about the new level for the Patreon, where you make your own podcast, he was like, oh, I want to do an anime one. And then like the next episode, like my podcast got announced. So
Beat him to the punch.
yeah, right. So, but yeah, no, it just fits, right? And the internet is just full of people just fighting and arguing. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's do the math. Let's get the actual results, you know? It was perfect.
I feel like I see more people arguing about anime characters than I do like Marvel versus DC or comic book characters in general. Like, I feel like everyone's always talking about who would beat Goku or someone like that, you know?
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's definitely a passionate fan base for sure.
Oh yeah, like I've shown you guys like how they talk to each other. It's very toxic if people don't agree. So I try and stay on the, on the edge, but like it is what it is. But it's fun. It's very fun.
And of course, there's nothing more objective to determining who would win these fights than math, right? You can't really argue with math. So I kind of feel like you're the last word on this subject, whether people want to admit that or not.
Pretty much, right?
So Senjoh World is releasing its 15th episode this week. It's going to be Alucard versus Muzaka for Spooktober. And plus, you've broken down some amazing matches in the past, like Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho versus Tanjiro from Demon Slayer. You've done Alan Walker from D. Greyman versus Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. And most recently, you did Denji the Chainsaw Man versus Dio Brando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Out of all the episodes you've done, what episodes so far, without spoiling anything, would you say has been your most surprising?
Most surprising would probably be the Devilman episode. I had a guest on for that one as well, and we were just amazed how great the matchup actually was. So yeah, I would have to say probably the Devilman versus Kaguya episode.
Nice. I am highly fascinated by the character of Chainsaw Man. I remember seeing him a while back when the anime first started coming out, and I was like, what the heck is this? I got to check this out because it's just, I don't know, the imagery of a guy with a chainsaw for a head is quite alarming. But I think one of the best qualities of Senjoh World for people like myself who aren't necessarily that well versed in anime is that Senjoh World is almost like a gateway drug, I think, for those who are curious about what anime is out there. My favorite episode of Senjoh World so far has been Alan Walker versus Edward Elric, largely because I've seen Full Metal Alchemist, but the story of D. Greyman sounded just fascinating.
My favorite episode was probably Gara versus Akutagawa. I know I totally butchered that. I always butcher the names.
Akutagawa.
Yeah, the guest you had on for that, just listening to you guys geek out over anime, it was just fun to listen to. It's fun to listen to people who are passionate about the genre talk about it.
Yeah, no, that is definitely one of the awesome parts about getting some of these guests, right? And it's putting me a little bit further into the anime community where I can, branch out a little bit more, even just expand my own knowledge base. It's really dope. Like, I'm loving it.
It's clear that you are really knowledgeable about the characters because when you go into your battle speculation, it seems like you have a solid grasp of not only what the characters can do, but also what they would do. And that can be a fine line because knowing what they would do requires a greater understanding of the characters and the characterization that they have. So kudos on that. I'm always really impressed by your battle speculations.
Oh, I appreciate that.
As an anime fan, What type of anime shows or movies are you most drawn to? And what would you say are some of your all-time favorites?
It's kind of cliche, but I'm definitely a shonen guy. Shonen is more action-based. A lot of shonen follows the same kind of tropes, and that's why a lot of people kind of hate on them. But I don't know. I find a lot of the best fights come from shonen. But don't get me wrong, there's a whole bunch of other ones that are just as good. But if I would have to say anything, it would probably be shonen, action, martial arts. That's usually like my wheelhouse. Anything that has that definitely draws me in right off the bat.
Which is totally fitting for a fight podcast.
Exactly.
I'm still waiting for you to do like Neon Genesis Evangelion versus Gundam, because you and I have had debates about that, and I will totally fight you on that one. You have to have me as a guest on that one.
For sure, 100%. I just don't want to like break your heart when it really comes down to it, you know? So
we'll see.
Jonathan gets his heart broken all the time on our show, so don't worry about it.
About half the time.
That's true. I just have to find the right Gundam to go up against it. But to be honest, I would probably bring the guy from Durlogin, that big robot. I think that would be a better matchup.
Well, that's a deep cut.
I'm never going to take your word for that one. I'm going to have to look that up now for sure.
That one's so good.
Can you tell us the origin of the name for your show, Senjoh World? Like, how did you come up with that?
Well, to be honest, I just kind of went on Google and I'm like, what would be some cool names, right? And then I was like, Battle World. So I looked up like, okay, how do I say battle in Japanese? And then it was just like Batul. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of stupid. So I was, searching around and everything. And then I was like, okay, let's try 2 words together because, in Japanese, they'll have a completely separate word for that, right? And so I put in Battle Arena, and that's where Senjoh came up. And it was one of the first things that actually popped up. Because I know we talked about it. We had a couple different spellings for it at the beginning, right?
That's right.
So Senjoh also has multiple meanings depending on how you spell it.
Right. Yeah. I think if you spell it with just the O, didn't it mean like fairy or something?
Fairy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But every time I hear the name Senjoh World, I always want to pronounce it in that heavy anime style where I'm like, Senjoh! But Jonathan won't let me.
Senjoh. Senjoh. You have to say it like deep. You have to say it deep.
Well, it depends on what anime archetype you are, I think. I consider myself like the burly, like excitable big guy,
Really?
Okay.
I do not
I think so.
Not see that.
Well, I'm definitely not like this skinny, like long-haired pretty boy type. I feel like that's just not how I see myself. So
No, you're like the short punk ass kid with glasses and like the messy hair.
Senjoh World is an awesome show. You should be super proud of it, Zach. We're super proud to have it as part of our Dynamite network. Listeners, if you love anime and want to see who mathematically would win in Zach's matchups, and if you're interested in hearing the stories of your favorite characters and perhaps discovering new favorites, be sure to listen to Senjoh World. That's Senjoh World. Anywhere you listen to podcasts or by visiting dynamicpodcast.com. Zach, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you. And yeah, look forward to listening to more Senjoh World in the future, especially this upcoming episode. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. And tell John I said what up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This episode is almost like a media night with the boys reunion.
That's the cool thing, too, like, because I just had John on my show, and it's pretty cool that, we're on the same episode. We might not be together, but we're still on the same episode.
Yeah, I think John's taken over. With that being said, let's go ahead and say goodbye to Zach and get on to our main event where we review the 2012 movie by Sony Pictures, Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance.
With guest host John Starosky.
All right, Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance came out in 2012, directed by Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, and starring Nicolas Cage, Idris Elba, Johnny Whitworth, and Kieran Hines. The movie is a quasi-sequel to the 2007 film directed by Mark Steven Johnson and also starring Nicolas Cage as Johnny Blaze, but it doesn't really keep anything else in regards to continuity. I used to struggle with these reboot sequels or requels, as it were. But now that the concept of the Marvel multiverse exists, it's easy to see this film and the 2007 Ghost Rider as parallel timelines where some things change, but some things, like Johnny Blaze, remain the same. But speaking of badasses named Johnny, and I sure as hell do not mean Johnny DC, I'm talking about Mad Trivia John, aka executive producer of this show, John Starosky from the Mad Trivia podcast. Say hi, John.
Hi, John. I had to. I'm sorry. Take that one. Thanks for having me on, guys. It is a pleasure to be back after so very long.
Yeah, you last joined us for the Amazing Spider-Man review that you did with Zach, who was on this episode earlier when you guys were doing the Media Night with the Boys podcast. Since that time, you've put out the Mad Trivia podcast, which marries the concepts of movie discussions and trivia. So tell us a little bit about that show.
Yeah, so as you well know, because I've actually had you on as a guest already, it is essentially a trivia game for my guests and a little bit of a Mad Lib as well at the end. My guests provide me their 5 favorite movies, of which I pick one without their knowledge. I then do a good amount of research to find as many good questions as I can, narrow it down to 10 with 11 possible answers, of course, one of those being a 2-answer question. And then I pretty much always stump them because I go really hard in the paint when it comes to research. You found out the hard way with Fight Club.
Yeah, I think I only got about half the questions right. Maybe?
Something like that, yeah, 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's a fantastic concept for a podcast. I never would have thought to marry Mad Libs with trivia and movies. It's phenomenal. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. And then as the Mad Libs go, I love doing that more than the trivia because I love taking those scenes that people love from those movies and making them unknowingly ruin it. And the result is usually just hilarious.
Those Mad Lib surprises are some of the best parts of the show, I think. Also, it's great just to hear people talk passionately about their favorite films.
Absolutely.
So I remember you enjoying The Amazing Spider-Man back when we reviewed it on this show. And I believe you really enjoyed Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, which is why we wanted to bring you on board for this review. So tell us, I guess, your history with this movie. Like, when did you first see it and what do you think about it overall?
Okay, so I am a Marvel fan, very long term. I've been following Marvel since the early days. Blade, obviously, as everyone knows, Blade kind of paved the way for everything, so to speak. And I started falling in love with the characters that they had. And then Ghost Rider came out in, what was it, 2007. And Nicolas Cage is so cheesy, but you have to love him. And the way he delivered the performance in the first one, I kind of it was new to me because I'd never seen that kind of character. And he was so unique that I just kind of always had this love for Ghost Rider in a way that is, it's always there and hoping that something good comes along. And I remember seeing it in theaters and I remember loving it. But I remember loving that one specific line in the middle of the movie, around the middle of the movie about Yeaton souls. We'll get there when we come to the review. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave the rest of my thoughts for during the review because I haven't seen it in a long time.
Okay.
And things have changed.
Oh, interesting.
This was actually my first time watching the movie, and it was so unbelievably different from what I was expecting. I don't know why, because I had heard that it was, kind of out there from other people who have seen it, but it kind of defied my expectations, which I didn't think was going to happen.
Defied them in a good way or a bad way?
In a just fucking weird way. Just like Nick Cage's performance, how completely different it was from the first movie. And just like the one-liners from Ghost Rider that he delivered, and just even the animation that they would incorporate into the movie and stuff like that. It was interesting. And I don't know if that's interesting in a good way.
I think it's in a good way. The directors, Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, are very different types of filmmakers than Mark Steven Johnson, who directed the 2007 film. I remember being fascinated that Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor were announced to direct this movie back when they announced that. Even though I've never seen the Crank franchise or the movie Gamer or any of their other films, but I knew of their reputation of creating movies that had gritty, adrenaline-packed action. And I was like, yes, that would be perfect for Ghost Rider. Because I also remember reading that even though they're the directors, they do most of the camera work on their films themselves with using handhelds while riding on rollerblades, which was this insane concept. It's like almost like they're stunt guys themselves. So I thought it was fitting that they were put on a film about a former stunt writer.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember in lead up to this film, just seeing sort of behind the scenes promotional material showing them like riding behind trucks on their rollerblades. That's dangerous stuff. And it's very admirable that you have these guys who are so ballsy and willing to take risks to get the shot that they really are envisioning in their head.
I remember seeing this and not having any association to the directors whatsoever. I think that's a really interesting perspective to have given this movie.
For sure, yeah. And not only the camera work, but also like the gritty visual tone that they chose. You know, they set the movie in Eastern Europe. I think they were trying to go for some kind of like, I think David Escoyer described it as Da Vinci Code-esque setting where, you have the main protagonist of that movie and this movie over in Europe kind of going on this adventure involving these monks and stuff like that. I know this movie is kind of like a far cry from the Da Vinci Code, but it is interesting that they have those kind of parallels. I think Eastern Europe was a fantastic setting for this film, not just because of the tone that it brought, but also the grittiness.
It's cool because we don't typically see Eastern Europe in a lot of superhero films. I sort of feel like that was another motivation for them to do this film there, because not only was it probably cheaper than filming in a lot of like major cities where, typical superhero films take place, but I totally get the Da Vinci Code connection because this film definitely looked very different from other films in the genre.
Yeah, the story was written by David S. Goyer, who is, yes, the very same David S. Goyer who wrote and directed the last film we reviewed, Blade Trinity. And while I don't think the story here was bad, like overall, I actually think that Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance has a decent Ghost Rider story. I will admit that it does feel a little bit cliche, and the dialogue was pretty terrible. I'll say that. But I think that the schlocky tone was maybe what the directors and the writer were going for, like almost a grindhouse appeal when you combine the dialogue with the gritty visuals. But I will say that if that was what they were going for, I don't think they took it far enough. I think a true grindhouse Ghost Rider film would be epic. But, straddling the line between a schlocky, gritty monster movie and a modern superhero action film just leads to something that can feel kind of almost half-hearted and occasionally silly.
Yeah, I agree with that. And now that you mentioned Grindhouse, I'm wondering how this would have looked if it's, is it Robert Rodriguez, the Grindhouse director?
Yes.
I would love to see his version of a Ghost Rider film now that I'm thinking about that.
Oh, man.
Oh, he and Guillermo del Toro would be at the top of my list in regards to the most ideal directors for a Ghost Rider film.
I think I would place Robert Rodriguez over Guillermo del Toro just because he's a little bit more gritty and, a little bit more like rubber meets the road, leather jacket kind of style with machine guns blazing and stuff like that, explosions in the background. He would be so perfect for that.
That's true.
I do sort of feel like, if the writer and directors were trying to make something that was a little bit grindhouse, I feel like they definitely got direction from the producers to, hey, make the cheapest possible film you can. Because the story is so simple. And I agree, it's not a terrible story for Ghost Rider. It feels very much like a comic book story to me. Like this is a comic book arc in the Ghost Rider comic. But you're right, it's very cliche, it's very simple. And I love David S. Goyer as a writer. So I was actually very surprised to see that he wrote this film because I didn't know that previously. That kind of made me be like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome, only to be severely disappointed. I actually think this is probably my least favorite film that I've seen of his, next to Blade Trinity, of course. I would say this is better than that.
I can't say that I agree or disagree on that one. I liked Blade Trinity when I initially saw it. I haven't rewatched it recently enough to know if I dislike it now. Yeah, I don't know if I would put this above or below Trinity.
All right, Joseph, you got to break the tie. What's worse, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance or Blade Trinity?
Well, definitely Blade Trinity. So if you compare each movie to the previous installments in their respective franchises, comparing Blade Trinity to the first two Blade films is like comparing a cheap beer to a fine wine, and comparing Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance to the first 2007 Ghost Rider is not that drastic of a comparison. But I do like the darker, gritty tone that this sequel decided to go with. I think it's the best thing it has over the original. There are a few things about the original I like a little bit more. I do think it set up the origin story for the character in a kind of groundbreaking way for the comic book character of Ghost Rider. But Spirit of Vengeance is more in line with what I would hope to see from a Ghost Rider film, I think. it shouldn't be your standard, superhero action adventure story. It should have a little bit more of a darker tone and feel. And I appreciate that.
That's fair. That's true. I didn't even think about how I would compare this film to the first Ghost Rider film. And I guess I would agree with you in that I do think that I liked this one more just because it felt, like I mentioned earlier, almost like a comic book. And I really liked that. I do wish it had a harder edge. It was only PG-13. They could totally go rated R with this character, and I think they should have. Like, to me, Ghost Rider should be a horror character. A horror Ghost Rider film without any comedy whatsoever, to me, is how a Ghost Rider film should be. I could be wrong, but I would love to see that.
Well, I would definitely say that the ideal Ghost Rider film would keep the jokes to a minimum. I mean, in an ideal world, a Ghost Rider film would be very much in the horror genre, I think. Horror action, for sure. But let's go ahead and get into the character breakdown, starting with Ghost Rider, a.k.a. Johnny Blaze, who's played by the one and only Nicolas Cage. And talking about the guy's acting skill and performance ability is no small task, I'll say that. On one hand, you have people who consider him one of the greatest actors of his generation, with films like Adaptation and Matchstick Men proving their point. On the other hand, you have people who consider him one of the worst actors ever, with films like Wicker Man and Vampire's Kiss proving their point. I think fittingly, his performance in Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance straddles both viewpoints, where at times I think he delivers a vulnerable, real performance, such as when he confesses his selfishness being behind his deal with the devil, and other times when he goes incredibly over the top, such as when the writer is trying to break through while interrogating one of Kerrigan's contacts. I think either way, whether you love him or hate him, at the very least you have to admit that his performances are interesting at worst and fun at best, or at least you can tell he has fun while performing.
Yeah, I can say with the utmost confidence that Nicolas Cage is the actor of all time.
That's true, for sure.
No, I did not love his performance in this movie. I wanted it to feel like it was interesting, but there were just so many unbelievably weird moments that I feel like he's kind of the worst aspect of this film. Like, I feel like this might have been a good Ghost Rider film if someone besides Nicolas Cage played him.
Okay. John, what do you think?
I don't think he was great, but I don't think it was his fault. I think the lines that he was given were just, it was like they weren't written for anyone to read. They were just there to throw out on the page. Like, it didn't feel like he was given the right script.
Who can deliver a line like, "I will eat your stinking soul"? No one can do that.
I almost wonder, though, if like he intentionally wanted those lines added. Something about his performance just makes me think that he wanted this character to be so much more weird than the first movie. I feel like the line delivery was something like roadkill. It's just so cheesy, sort of in the same way that his performance was cheesy. So I don't know if it's the writing. I wouldn't be surprised if, he just delivered those lines ad-libbed while they were performing. It almost felt that way to me.
That wouldn't surprise me because he does make a lot of strange choices. In the first Ghost Rider movie, he was the one who wanted to be drinking jelly beans out of martini glasses and things like that. Just these little weird idiosyncrasies that he thought would help inform his portrayal of Johnny Blaze. What's kind of funny is that Nicolas Cage in this movie, Spirit of Vengeance, he allegedly invented a new acting technique when playing the character of Ghost Rider called Nouveau Shamanism, where he painted his face black with a white skull, kind of like Baron Samedi. And he sewed some ancient Egyptian trinkets into his leather jacket to try to invoke some kind of supernatural energy into his performance.
The fuck?
And you could definitely see it, I think, in the character of Ghost Rider, because there's a lot of times during the film where I'm like, what is Ghost Rider doing? Like why is he acting that way? Like, he's swaying back and forth, just standing there and acting creepy. It's not a traditional approach that Nicolas Cage took to this, for sure. But I do think his version of Ghost Rider was more creepy here than the first film, which I think means it's better.
He definitely came off as a bit more creepy, albeit very stale at times. It was like he went from not moving at all, and then he was swaying, and then he was just fast and in your face. Like, it did kind of catch me off guard. I think they were intending for jump scares in those scenes, and it didn't scare so much as it just kind of shocked that it went from nothing to burst of speed.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way, and I know exactly what you're talking about, and it makes me think that the film also suffered from poor editing. Because I think if they would have cut down those weird slow moments and just kept him as this like frightening in your face creature, he would have been a lot more effective.
I agree. Yeah, totally.
Now, the character of Johnny Blaze has always been a tragic one in the comics, where his superpower is really a curse and a burden, similar to the Hulk, where his powered form is a separate being of wanton destruction. At the start of the film, Johnny Blaze is essentially in self-exile, but when given the opportunity to remove the demon, he takes it, which is understandable. But Johnny Blaze lives with this guilt of his selfishness, and he claimed to Moreau that it led him to make the deal with the devil in the first place. And despite this weight that he feels, what he learns after the fact of removing the curse is that, maybe he's not as selfish as he once thought, because he chooses to potentially sacrifice his mortal self to save the boy, Danny. He chooses to take back the curse, and he revives the boy from death. In the end, he discovers he's actually quite a selfless, heroic person, despite what he may have thought earlier. And like the Ghost Rider itself, perhaps he finds himself as an angel in disguise.
I like that description. I do. I think that that kind of validates a lot of how it played out.
Yeah, his arc, I think, was actually really well done in this movie. I love at the beginning when Moreau and Johnny Blaze are first meeting, and, Moreau's like, you have to save this boy. And Johnny's like, oh, I don't save people. But by the end, you see that, like you mentioned, he actually does. The whole reveal, the whole secret that he chose to save his father, even though his father had accepted the fact that he was cancer stricken, was an element to Johnny Blaze's story that was surprising to me. And I thought very heartfelt and very interesting for the character.
What did you think of the revelation in this movie, at least, that Zarathos was once an angel who was tortured in hell and transformed from an angel of justice to a spirit of vengeance?
Honestly, I don't know how it compares to the comic book origin of Zarathos, but I do like that he's kind of like this fallen angel character. It gives him a little bit more depth that you otherwise wouldn't have, especially considering in the first movie there was no delving into Zarathos's history or background or anything. There was nothing really to him. He was just the entity inside of Johnny Blaze. So
Right.
That little bit more perspective that we got, even if it is only just a small amount, it does give the character more depth that you didn't get to experience, and kind of gives more of an understanding as to where the hatred's coming from. And I think that makes him more relatable.
Yeah, definitely adds interest to the character for sure.
I thought it was badass that they went the angel route with the Zarathos. Like you mentioned, John, they didn't mention Zarathos in the first movie. I'm really glad that they did this round, because you're right, it does add a little bit more dimension to not just Johnny Blaze, but the character of Ghost Rider. At the very end, when he goes blue, I thought that was a really cool way of showing that he's sort of like become this redeemed figure in a way. He's fighting for justice now, not just vengeance.
Yeah, the blue fire aspect is an interesting one that comes from the comics. This film was heavily inspired by the Road to Damnation storyline from the comics, which was written by Garth Ennis, which was a fantastic run. Yeah, really, I highly recommend that one. The art was incredible alone. So the second person to be Ghost Rider was Johnny Blaze's brother, Danny Ketch, who in the comics at one point lost his powers, and he was offered to take them up again by an angel named Zadkiel. And when Zadkiel bestowed upon him the powers, he had blue flame. So it was like he was the angel rider. But in the end, it turned out that Zadkiel was actually an evil angel who was looking to overthrow heaven. But it was interesting how they kind of took that blue fire aspect, which is the angel's fire, and then applied that to Johnny Blaze at the end of this movie, when he was able to, tap into Zarathos's former angel powers.
Yeah, that was really cool, I thought.
I do think that the character of Ghost Rider is so much better looking, or at least more believable, I should say, in this movie than in the first film, largely because of that black skull. For some reason, even though in the comics Ghost Rider's flaming skull is depicted as white, it just doesn't look as real in live action like how it did in the first movie. And you could see the difference when comparing the two Ghost Riders from the two films. Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance just looks more realistic.
The same could be said about the leather. I mean, it's got that bubbled, boiling, freshly burned look to it. And it definitely seems like they invested more of their budget into the look of Ghost Rider in this movie. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, I'm really glad they updated his look for this film. And I didn't even know it needed updating, but apparently it did, because this was way more hella cool than the first movie.
I'll say, however, that the design of the Hell Cycle in the first movie was leaps and bounds better than this motorcycle in Spirit of Vengeance. Like, Ghost Rider needs to be riding, like some kind of demonic chopper, like in the first film, or some kind of souped up Danny Ketch style techno crotch rocket or something interesting like that, but not just some standard, Yamaha cruiser like he had in this movie. I thought that was really disappointing. I do think he needs something a little bit more stylistic or cool.
Gotta be a chopper. It's gotta be a chopper.
I don't know much about motorcycles. I actually liked this more than the chopper, and I feel like I'm about to be jumped by like a biker gang of guys who are like, fuck you, choppers are the best. I don't know. I guess it's just my aesthetic. I lean more crotch rocket than chopper. Personally, I think they're cooler. And not that this was a crotch rocket, but I didn't hate it.
Let's go ahead and move on to Moreau, who is played by Idris Elba. Now, Idris Elba is actually better in this movie than he had any right to be. The first time I saw the film where, from the very opening scene, he's portrayed as this badass character, French and drunk, leaping down staircases, ripping turns on his motorcycle, and slow motion shooting tires off cars while falling to his apparent death. I just remember being like, who the F is this guy? Perhaps the story gave too much agency to him and maybe gave him too big of a role to a guy who isn't even from the comics. But part of me doesn't even care because Idris Elba crushed it. He crushed this role.
The French accent kept throwing me because Idris Elba has such a distinct, like, British accent, Mm-hmm. I thought he was great in the role, don't get me wrong. I could have sworn he was from the comics with as big of a role as he had. Like, I was ready to hear all about him during this review.
Yeah, you think he would be from the comics. But no, he's a completely original character that they made for this film who just happened to be kind of a superhero in his own right, a superhero monk, as it were.
Yeah. I also think, by the way, that I agree that he was badass in this movie. There was no question about that whatsoever.
Yeah, and every bit the hero that Ghost Rider was, he ended up sacrificing himself at the end just to buy Johnny a chance at saving the kid. So maybe one day he will make an appearance in the comics. But speaking of the comics, let's go ahead and move into our villain, Blackout, a.k.a. Ray Kerrigan, played by Johnny Whitworth. This movie, I think, is the first and only time I've ever seen Johnny Whitworth in anything. My first impression was that, just like Idris Elba, Kerrigan was more character than was necessary for the film. I don't want to be misconstrued as advocating that actors should be generic in their roles, but when a movie presents somebody that is clearly like someone but doesn't really delve into who that someone is beyond a surface level, it does leave viewers with a lot of questions. And I think that could be a little bit frustrating. Beyond the very surface level exploration of Kerrigan, I did think that he was cool and a convincing enough mercenary asshole type character. Although I'll say I didn't find the actor quite as convincing as Blackout when he's in his supervillain form. I think just because of how not menacing and goofy the character looks.
Yeah, that hair was rough. The way his skin was kind of peeling around the edges. I mean, I know that the intent was there because of his ability to decay, but I don't get decay from bleach blonde. So I was really pulled away from that.
Yeah, what's interesting is that in the comics, he doesn't have the power of decay. So the fact that they gave him that power in this movie and then kind of based his makeup look around this decaying figure was a strange choice for sure.
What does he do in the comics?
So in the comics, Blackout is a half demon character. He's the grandson of Lilith, who is the mother of demons. And he has enhanced strength and durability and speed like a half demon would. But he also has razor sharp fangs and claws. He's kind of like vampiric in that regard, but his main power is to extinguish light and generate this type of darkness that deprives victims of all their senses. So, of course, that type of power would be really hard to replicate on film, where audiences need to actually, see and hear what's going on. But I do think the movie did an okay job of portraying it as more of this psychic darkness of sorts, where his victims' minds kind of go into this shroud of darkness and they only see him. But, it allows the audience to still see what's going on.
I do think that this was an interesting concept for a henchman type secondary bad guy. But I'm also with you, Joseph. I didn't quite think the performance was menacing enough at the end. It was more silly than anything, I felt.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of silly, let's go ahead and move on to Mephisto, aka Rourke, for some reason, played by Ciarán Hinds. I'll come out and say it right away. The first movie did it better when it comes to the devil, because Peter Fonda was so cool in the first Ghost Rider movie, and seeing Ciarán Hinds take over the role was just so disappointing. I don't think he brought anything to the role other than being a man in his later years with a deepish voice. Almost anyone could have done this role, I feel, but it should have been Peter Fonda, and that way you could have had that greater sense of continuity between films.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know this actor. I just kind of thought he was like Stephen Fry's stunt double.
Yeah. Oh, you know this guy. He played Steppenwolf in Justice League.
Well, he did the voice for Steppenwolf.
Oh, and the mocap, I believe.
I doubt that. But Rourke, towards the end, when his face was melting, it just looked really bad, and they should have went a different route, I think, with that effect. They probably could have showed his like skin cracking or something like that, but instead they decided to make him look like he had the mumps, which was a bad call, for sure.
Yeah.
How do you guys think you would have gone about portraying visually the idea that his body is succumbing to its own power?
I don't know. I think you could have gone a route similar to Ghost Rider in that like he sort of has this fire emanating from him, at least turn his skin red. So he looks a tad bit like Mephisto from the comics, you know? I didn't mind that Ciarán Hinds played this role though, because they did kind of establish the fact that Mephisto, the devil, has taken on many forms through the ages. To me, this was just sort of like his next form after Peter Fonda. I do agree that Peter Fonda did it better, but I didn't really mind the actor swap.
Thinking about it for me, I think I would have much rather seen him not cracking, but like almost losing like structure. Like his bones started showing, his skin started getting tight around his bones on certain spots of him. I think that would have been a better representation, like almost like rapid aging in certain areas.
That would have been a cool effect too, for sure. Both of those ideas are better than what they did. Let's go ahead and move on to Nadia Ketch, who is played by Violante Placido, I think is how you pronounce that. She's an Italian actress. I've never seen her before, and she hasn't been in too much. The only other notable thing I saw that she was in was Transporter, the series. But I thought she was good for what the script called for. I do think she was a believable badass. I do find myself kind of wishing that there was more romantic tension, I guess, between her and Johnny Blaze, because I think that could have brought more of an overt father-son-like dynamic to the story.
Wait, because I just caught on to something that I didn't catch when I was watching the movie. Her last name is Ketch, so this is Danny Ketch? This is his mom?
Yeah, this is in fact Danny Ketch. The boy is Danny Ketch from the comics. And I guess we could just jump right into him. He's played by Fergus Riordan, who, you know, he's a kid actor. He's fine. He did fine. It is weird how they made him Danny Ketch, though, because fans of the character will know that Danny Ketch is Johnny Blaze's brother, who in the comics, as I mentioned, became the second version of Ghost Rider. Here, there's no relation between Danny and Johnny, but I do think that maybe they were going for like a brotherly type dynamic between the two characters when Johnny is trying to kind of relate to the kid and tell him that the power they have comes from a dark place, but it doesn't make them bad. It was almost like he was a mentor.
Which is kind of cool. Like, you never see Ghost Rider really as a mentor. But as cool as it is, I do kind of wish now, knowing that this is fucking Danny Ketch, that they would have cast the role older.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been great if he was in his teens or something.
Yeah. If he was just like 5 years older, you could have had like a cool like Terminator 2 dynamic kind of mentorship going on. I think that would have been cooler than what we got here.
I think that's a good call. Have him older and more capable even, because what do they say, is like 9, 10, 11 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
To give that kind of an aged child that kind of power seems extraordinarily irresponsible.
Yeah, like if Rourke's plan was successful, then he would have been like this little twerp kid now with the power of the devil. You would think that Mephisto would at least want to transfer his power into a young adult man at the very least, you know?
Yeah, like early 20s. At least someone who's gone through fucking puberty. Come on.
Right? That's a great point. All right, let's go ahead and move into our story highlights. In Eastern Europe, probably Romania, I'm guessing, An alcoholic monk named Moreau tries to warn a monastery that a boy they're harboring, Danny Ketch, is not safe there and he's wanted by the devil. A group of mercenaries led by Kerrigan arrive to take the child, causing Danny and his mother Nadia to flee.
I actually kind of thought this was a really cool setup for the movie. I was very intrigued by it. I expected to see Ghost Rider like right off the bat, but to see this Moreau character, I thought it was really cool. It was just a pretty badass scene, I thought.
Yeah, the whole like getting knocked off of his motorcycle and shooting his gun in slow motion, shooting out the tire while falling to his death was quite the opening action scene.
Yeah, I thought he was dead. I thought they were going to kill him off.
Yeah, I was like, well, what was the point of that?
Right.
So after a brief animated reintroduction to Johnny Blaze, Moreau seeks him out for help, promising that if he escorts the boy to his order, he will help remove the Ghost Rider curse. Nadia and Danny are captured by Kerrigan and his men, prompting Ghost Rider to find them and kill several of the mercenaries, using the penance stare on one of them. He's knocked out with several grenade launchers, however, and Kerrigan escapes with Danny. I remember being so pumped for this scene in theaters when we see Ghost Rider like launch his motorcycle over everybody's heads and like land and do a donut. I thought he was immediately going to jump off his bike and kick some ass. So when he just started standing there and rocking, I was like, what the fuck is happening? Kill somebody. I also thought the penance stare in this movie, if you didn't know what the penance stare was, you'd have no fucking idea what was going on. For one, it took way too long to implement. And two, there were no visual cues exactly as to what was going on. He was just holding their head and they started screaming and then they'd burst into flames. But it seems so unnecessary because Ghost Rider clearly demonstrated the ability to make anyone burst into flames upon contact with either him or his chains. So why would he leave himself vulnerable for so long, taking such a long time to consume this guy's soul? It just seemed weird. They should have had at least some kind of visual cue with the eyes like they did in the first movie, where you could actually see the people living out their crimes and stuff like that. There was nothing like that here.
Or at least do something with like the eyes glowing like they did in the opening animation for this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to the first movie, that was much, much better than this movie with the pen and stare. And, I mean, he even said stuff in the first one when he was doing the pen and stare. This one, he just kind of looked creepily with his head tilting left and right like he was a dog hearing a funny sound.
Right.
That's a great way to describe it.
I just want someone to like make a super cut of like him moving and like swaying back and forth to like some music. That would be hilarious.
That would be hilarious. Waking up in the hospital, Johnny confronts Nadia, who took him there, and she wants to know if he can use Ghost Rider to find Danny. However, the devil, aka Rourke, places a spell on Danny through Kerrigan's phone that prevents Ghost Rider from tracking him. Johnny learns that Nadia sold her soul to the devil to keep from dying, in exchange, burying the devil's son, Danny. This is where we saw the second animatic of the movie, where we got an explanation on how the devil uses the power of his deal to conduct business on Earth or to get things done. There was a really strange moment during this scene where they seem to imply that Jerry Springer was the devil.
Yes.
Now, this movie came out in 2007, and I think Jerry Springer lost relevancy somewhere like in 2001, the year 2000. Definitely his peak was in the 90s, you know? So it was such a dated reference. I don't understand why they went with Jerry Springer, given that that joke was probably made about a decade too late.
This movie came out in 2012. You said 2007.
Oh, shit. Yeah, this movie came out in 2012. I meant 2012. So even later... The first movie came out in 2007. So by 2012, the Jerry Springer joke was way too late. Nadia takes Johnny to one of Kerrigan's contacts at a gambling ring where, as Johnny tries to constrain Ghost Rider, they learn that Kerrigan is meeting with an arms dealer at a quarry. They go there and Ghost Rider destroys everyone using a big-ass mining machine while Nadia rescues and escapes with Danny. Ghost Rider catches up with them and turns on Nadia, about to use the pen and stare on her, but reverts to Johnny when Danny commands him to stop. So this is where we get the infamous Nicolas Cage beating down the door performance. A lot of times when I watch this movie, I just love it. I laugh my ass off. But I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, what the fuck is he doing?
As over the top as it was, I loved it.
You can tell he at least has fun. Like he's really trying to go for something, pretending that Ghost Rider is attempting to crawl out from him, essentially. I will say that I did really like the effect that when he was about to turn into Ghost Rider, like his eye sockets would suck in, like his face was turning into a skull. I thought that was a pretty cool, horrific idea.
I mean, as fake as it looked, I guess it was cool. You say that Nicolas Cage had fun, but part of me feels like he was taking this super seriously as an actor. Like, this is his art form, you know? I don't know if he had fun with it. I don't think he did. I think part of me just feels like sometimes he's oblivious to what the hell he's doing and thinks he's doing something brilliant. And maybe he is. I have no idea. I don't think this is one of those times.
Well, it's one of two things, right? Either he's super not self-aware, or he's very self-aware and he has this kind of like weird sense of humor where he doesn't really care about what people think about him and just does whatever he wants to on the day because he thinks it's fun. I think either option is plausible, but for the sake of the actor himself and kind of the respect that I have for the good performances he has given in the past, I like to think he just has a weird sense of humor.
An auteur, okay.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
What did you guys think about the big ass mining machine? I thought that was really cool. It's rare that you see Ghost Rider take over other types of vehicles. We learned, in the comics that later on that he could do it because, Robbie Reyes' vehicle of choice is his car. But the idea of the character of Ghost Rider being able to take over any vehicle and turn it into a hell vehicle is so cool when that vehicle is, 5 stories high and weighing thousands of tons.
I mean, we kind of saw in the first movie that anything that the rider rides is going to be a hell vehicle with Carter Slade's horse.
Right.
But I do got to say the badass mining machine, I thought that him turning into basically a quasi chainsaw was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was so badass.
That was really cool. Yeah.
If you guys could put Ghost Rider on any vehicle besides a motorcycle or a car, what do you think would be cool to see?
I'm going to go with the funny one first, and I'll come back to a serious one. The funny one's going to be him on a horse and carriage.
Yeah, that would actually look pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I think the horse and buggy with him on the buggy would be pretty fantastic.
What's the not funny one?
A Tesla. It's got to be a Tesla.
An electric self-driving hell vehicle, for sure.
I want to see him ride a helicopter. Just having like a flaming freaking fan on top. That'd be cool.
That would be cool.
You broke me when you said helicopter, and the first thing that came into my head is helicopter. It just
boom.
Yeah, that's how it would have to be spelled, right?
Well, it'll have two L's instead of the one.
I go two ways with this question. Like, part of me would love to see him ride something ridiculous, like a kid's tricycle, and turn it into like a hell tricycle. But the other part of me goes the completely opposite direction, and like I would like to see him in like the space shuttle or something like that. Just this big, massive like rocket.
Oh, that would be badass.
That would be awesome.
He would just like ride it around like Slim Pickens from Dr. Strangelove. That'd be great.
Yeah. Back to the story, Johnny, Nadia, and Danny meet up with Moreau on their way to his monastery. Meanwhile, Rourke resurrects Kerrigan as Blackout, who steals an ambulance to track down Danny. Johnny and the group arrive at Moreau's order, led by Methodius. Who freaking knew that Christopher Lambert was going to be in this movie? Because I did not the first time I watched it. I was like, holy crap, it's freaking Highlander Raiden guy.
I was very surprised when I saw him, but then I was like, should I have been? Because like Idris Elba, Nicolas Cage, it seems like the kind of film that Christopher Lambert would love to be in.
My favorite gag in the whole movie is during this part where we see Blackout riding in the ambulance and he's looking for something to eat, but everything he touches decays in his grasp until he grabs the Twinkie, which just stays static. And he's like, oh, okay, and pops it in his mouth. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah,
that was funny, but it left me with questions. He was pulling things out of the lunchbox. They were decaying. How was he driving the ambulance?
That's a great question. You would think that, like how the sword started rusting that he touched later on, that anything metal that he was touching, like the car, would also rust or fall apart. It's a great question. Back to the story, Moreau tells Johnny about the history of the demon Zarathos, how it was an angel of justice before being tortured in hell and corrupted into the spirit of vengeance, and then bonded to Johnny as the Ghost Rider. After confessing that his deal with the devil was made out of selfishness, Johnny goes into a chamber and exorcises the demon. It was an interesting scene when Ghost Rider was getting exorcised. Like, it was a weird acting moment, I think, when Nicolas Cage was like, "Merry Christmas, assholes," or something like that. It was so bizarre.
Right.
That's weird.
Such a Nick Cage moment.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Methodius attempts to kill Danny, believing that the boy is a threat as long as he exists. He and the monks are killed by Blackout, however, who kidnaps Danny and delivers him to Rourke, who plans to transfer his mind and power into the child in a ritual. Johnny, Moreau, and Nadia infiltrate the ritual location to rescue Danny. Kerrigan kills Moreau, but Danny returns the demon Zarathos to Johnny, giving him back the power of the Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider kills the devil worshippers in attendance, then pursues Rourke, who had escaped the ritual with Danny.
Between when Johnny didn't have the demon and when he did, he was being held down by Garrigan, who was rubbing his hands all over Johnny and touching him, and you would see the decay, but then it would instantly heal.
Yeah.
Why? That has no logical sense to it.
No, it's definitely an error in special effects continuity, where we clearly see Johnny Blaze's forehead start to decay, and then in the very next shot, it's entirely gone. I do think that this is an editing issue. I think they took too long with Blackout holding Johnny Blaze and didn't get to the whole getting the power back quick enough.
Yeah.
My favorite shot in the whole movie, though, is that above shot down on Ghost Rider as he's surrounded by the devil worshippers, and then he turns into Ghost Rider and he spins his chain around, just freaking annihilating all of them. I love that shot.
That was a cool shot.
Legend of Zelda style.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of liked it, and how like you weren't quite sure in that moment if he was going to fully be Ghost Rider until he whips out that chain. It's like, surprise, bitches! Then they're all dead.
Yeah. In a really cool chase scene, Ghost Rider destroys Rourke's convoy and fights Blackout, who eventually succumbs to Ghost Rider's penance stare. After causing Rourke's vehicle to crash, Ghost Rider sends him back to hell by slamming him through the ground. Though Danny is believed to be dead, Johnny is able to summon the power of Zarathos' former angel powers to revive him. The film ends with Ghost Rider wielding blue fire.
Riding into the sunset.
I thought it was a great chase scene towards the end here. It was cool to see him take over one of the military vehicles and turn it into like a hell jeep.
Yes.
Again, I think that the penance stare took too long to work on Blackout. At that point, it almost felt like a kind of a, not a Deus Ex Machina, but kind of like this cheap move where you always knew that Ghost Rider had it in his back pocket, the ability to do the penance stare. So you wonder why he didn't like do it sooner, or why doesn't he do it more often against these guys. It's almost like Ghost Rider knew he was saving the penance stare for the climax in his fight against Blackout, which is feels a little cheap.
I agree. I thought this chase scene was really cool at the end. I loved just being able to see everything because it took place during the day. As cool as Ghost Rider looks at night, I thought he looked equally as cool during the day with like all the black smoke and stuff like that. It was awesome to see. You showed me the trailer for this movie before I watched it, Joseph, and I was surprised at how much of like the final chase scene sequence in battle ended up in the trailer.
Yeah, definitely the final ripping out of the axle and causing Rourke's vehicle to crash. That was kind of like his coup de grace, other than slamming Rourke through the ground. And actually, you know what? Slamming Rourke through the ground was also in the trailer. So
it was.
Yeah, the whole final blow was entirely in the marketing for this film. Although I guess you wouldn't know that unless you had seen the movie.
So was the flamethrower penis, by the way. That was also in one of the trailers.
That's right. That's so awesome. I was going to say stupid, but then I switched it to awesome because I think that's a better description. I do kind of love how the last line, like at the end of Punisher Warzone, the last line was like, oh, great, now I got brains splattered all over me, which is just like, it's so ridiculous, but it's amusing in how devil may care it is, to use a pun. The last line for this movie was just as good, where they're like, did we win? And he's like, I'm going to say yes. Hell yes. And like the camera zooms in on his face and everything like that. That's so good.
His eyes like bulged out of his head.
Yeah. Jonathan, I take it you didn't like that.
I fucking rolled my eyes so fucking hard.
No one cares about your opinion. That was awesome.
Apparently.
But that's the end of the film. Overall, the film is such a mixed bag. There are aspects to Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance that I have a lot of fun with, that I think were really well done for the character of Ghost Rider. There are also some pretty objectively bad parts about the film, Nicolas Cage's performance being one of them. Even though I do think he had fun, I do think he could have made some better choices for a better film. So the film revs and stalls, swerving between gritty and silly, with scorching action, but a cliched story, with fiery performances, but burned out dialogue. I'm giving the film 3 stars out of 5, which is a 60%, but I'm classifying it as a rotten rating for Rotten Tomatoes. Because at the end of the day, I don't think I would actually recommend it to a whole lot of people unless they were big-time Ghost Rider fans.
Yeah, I think a rotten rating makes sense because it's right on the cusp of 60%. So you could go either way. And I do agree that there was a lot to like about it. There was also a lot to dislike about it. The biggest thing I disliked, as I mentioned earlier, was Nicolas Cage's performance. I think he kind of hurt the film in a way, which is hard to say because I know how cherished Nicolas Cage is as an actor, but sometimes it just came off as almost borderline cartoony and just bizarre, as I mentioned earlier. Ultimately, my thoughts on the film come down to how much I respect David Goyer as a writer versus Nicolas Cage as an actor. And I really find it hard to believe that David Goyer, as often as he can sometimes drop the ball, would write lines like, hell yes, you know? So I put a lot of that on Nicolas Cage.
Earlier on, I did say that I loved this movie, and then going back to it, I hadn't watched it in a long time, and a lot of it doesn't feel like it did when I watched it 11 years ago. And I mean, that's easy to say. Anybody can forget how something feels after 11 years. You can totally lose track of things and how they felt or how they were, and just in your memory, you know, things change over time. Seeing Nicolas Cage deliver lines that felt like he didn't write them, and then in the next scene, there was a bunch of lines that felt like he wrote them, and then back and then forth, that took me out of it a lot. The animation sequences also kind of took me out of it. Yeah. I had never realized until you mentioned it, actually, that this was a requel. I understand, but I also see no purpose to it. It could have been a much better movie if they just continued the continuity and had more of the same actors or more of that original story being followed through with. I can't justifiably even give this better than a 2.5 because of how much it was let down compared to what I remembered. So I'm going to go 2.5.
Yeah, sometimes nostalgia could get the better of you. I could totally see how this film could be 2.5 stars as well as 3. But John, thank you so much for joining us for this review. We're really glad to have you as a guest, and hopefully I can return as a guest on your show, Mad Trivia Podcast. I know that Jonathan will be recording here shortly, doing a guest spot for your show, talking about his favorite movies. So that'll be a lot of fun to listen to. Yeah. Listeners, if you want to hear what my 5 favorite movies are, and then see me get pretty embarrassing with the Mad Libs, definitely go check out John's show. It's a blast. So thanks again, John, and we'll talk to you later.
Later.
But that does it for this review. Let us know what you guys thought about the movie by writing to us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com or by visiting us on Instagram or X. You can find links to all of our accounts by checking out our show notes or visiting our website at dynamicduel.com.
And on our site, you could also find a link to our Patreon page where you could join our Dynamic 2.0 tier and chat with us and fellow listeners, our fantastic 4 tier, which gets you bonus content each month, our X-Force tier that makes you an executive producer of this podcast, or our newest tier that lets you join our Dynamike podcast network. If you can't join Patreon, you can still support the show by signing up for our e-newsletter, also at dynamicduel.com, so you never miss an episode.
You can also rate this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or on our website. Our next episode is a big one, guys. It comes out Halloween Day, and it's going to close out Spooktober with one of the biggest surprises that this show has ever provided to our listeners. Should we give them a hint, Jonathan, as to what the next episode is going to be?
Fuck no!
All right, he said it. I guess we're saving the surprise for when you guys see the next episode drop, so look forward to that. But that does it for this episode. We want to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Ken Johnson,
John Starosky,
Zachary Hepburn,
Dustyn Balcom,
Miggy Matanguihan,
Brandon Estergard,
Nathaniel Wagner,
Levi Yeaton,
Nick Abanto,
Austin Wesolowski,
AJ Dunkerley,
Scott Camacho,
Adam Speas,
and Andrew Schunk for helping make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Up, and away!
True believers.
You will tell me or I will eat your stinking soul.